The book of Genesis, is it fact or is it fiction? Is the Bible specifically a historical narrative, or is the Bible something more? Is it specifically just history, or is it something a lot broader? Well, today we are going to discuss a portion of the book of Genesis. So, as you know, the Bible starts off in the book of Genesis. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And so that's what we see in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1. That's what we see in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to peel through some layers of the book of Genesis and discuss what the book of Genesis is trying to tell us about God, about ourselves, and about how we interact with God and how God interacts with us. So the first thing is we're going to discuss the introduction to the book of Genesis. Genesis 1 is basically a foundational text that we can use as a cross-reference for various aspects of both the Old and the New Testament. You have to understand that that's what it was written for. There are things in the New Testament that directly correlate with things in the Old Testament. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, okay? Genesis 1 is a template that really sets up as a cross-reference point for many of the things in the Old Testament and definitely in the New Testament. It should be noted, a lot of times when people talk about the book of Genesis, they always try to make the book of Genesis this narrative of like creation versus evolution. It should be noted that the book of Genesis was not written to argue creation versus evolution. And here's why. The reason why the book of Genesis was not set up as a narrative of creation versus evolution was it was written in the time of the writers. And the writers were dealing with a world that was either one God creating the universe or multiple gods fighting with each other. And creation was the byproduct of their chaos. So not that creation was intentional by one God, but that creation was this unintentional byproduct, which I guess you could argue is a type of evolution by multiple gods. It should be noted that Genesis is not an original notation, and its original notation is not a methodology of creationism versus evolution. This is not something that would have been communicated by the author or authors of the book of Genesis in biblical times. While the book of Genesis is a statement about the existence of God or Yahweh as the creator, it has to be read through the lens of the culture of that time. So what are we going to be looking at? The emphasis is placed on the understanding that Genesis is not a discourse or not a discussion of creation versus evolution, but that the book of Genesis is a statement about the existence of God and how God interacts with his creation. Dr. Michael Heiser in the book, The Genesis in the Ancient Near East, said this, his YouTube narrative of Genesis in the Ancient Near East said this: the purpose of Genesis is not creation. Genesis is not creation. It's theological messaging. We have to understand that they're not trying to prove that God created the heavens and the earth. They're really trying to prove the superiority of Yahweh, the Most High God, over the other gods of that area. From the Southside Rabbi, one of my favorite Christian rappers, KB, he said this: the text is on the backdrop of Moses telling the formerly enslaved Israelites after 400 years of oppression who the God of Israel is that saved them. We have to understand this, that Moses and whoever else is involved is trying to get the Israelites to re-understand who their God is, why their God existed, and why their God chose them to be a royal priesthood, to be a holy nation, a royal priesthood separated by God unto his purpose alone. So, while we can note that the Bible, the book of Genesis, does speak explicitly of God, Yahweh, creating the universe, we cannot make it a reference point or a debate of young earth versus old earth. That's not what it's about. It is specifically about showing how Yahweh, the Most High God, is superior over all the alleged deities of other cultures. And because of that, anything else is implicative. We're implicating the other things about how God created the universe. And so the book of Genesis is a story introducing the Most High God, Yahweh, into creation.